Have you ever wondered how ancient humans bathed? If you are like most people, you probably imagine our distant ancestors as walking piles of mud, caked in dried blood and smelling like wet dogs, wandering through the wilderness without a single thought for hygiene until modern plumbing was invented. Or perhaps you believe that the concept of getting clean is a relatively recent luxury, born from the invention of the porcelain bathtub and the mass production of lavender-scented body wash. Both of these assumptions are completely wrong. In reality, our modern routine of standing under a pressurized stream of hot water, scrubbing ourselves with synthetic chemical surfactants, and spraying ourselves with artificial fragrances is a bizarre historical anomaly, a flash in the pan of the last 150 years. For 99% of human existence, getting clean had absolutely nothing to do with turning a metal tap. Yet our ancestors were far from filthy. In fact, if a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer were to look at your daily shower routine today, they would likely find it not only incredibly wasteful, but chemically aggressive, damaging, and socially isolating. To understand how ancient humans stayed clean is to dismantle everything we think we know about dirt health, and what it actually means to be a human being. To understand why ancient humans had to wash, we first have to look at the harsh reality of survival in the wild. In the popular imagination, prehistoric humans did not care about body odor or dirt, but in the brutal crucible of nature, being dirty was a literal death sentence. If you are covered in a thick layer of sweat, animal grease, and caked mud, you become an easy target. Predators can smell you from miles downwind, ruining your chances of sneaking up on prey or hiding from danger. Furthermore, unwashed skin is a playground for parasites, ticks, lice, and fleas, which do not just cause discomfort, they carry deadly typhus plague and skin infections that can turn a minor scratch into a fatal case of sepsis. Prehistoric humans knew this, not through modern germ theory, but through thousands of years of trial error and keen observation. They understood that a clean body was a healthy, stealthy, and functional body, but without running water pipes or bars of soap. How did they actually achieve this? The answer lies in a brilliant understanding of physical chemistry and the natural world, long before the academic discipline of chemistry was ever established. To get clean, you must first solve a fundamental biological problem, sebum. The human skin naturally secretes sebum, an oily, waxy substance designed to moisturize and protect our epidermis. While sebum is vital for our health, it acts like a magnet for environmental grime, soot from campfires, dead skin cells, and blood from hunted animals. Because oil and water do not mix, simply splashing yourself with cold river water will not remove this greasy, dirty layer. To break down and lift away this oily barrier, you need either chemical emulsification or mechanical abrasion. Our prehistoric ancestors mastered both. The most basic and widespread method of cleaning was mechanical abrasion. Using the very earth beneath their feet, humans would gather fine river sand, volcanic ash, or soft clay and rub it vigorously over their wet skin. The gritty particles of sand and ash acted as a natural exfoliant, physically scraping away the dirty sebum, sweat, and dead skin cells, which could then be rinsed away in a nearby stream. It was a brutal, scraping process, but it left the skin incredibly clean and stimulated blood circulation. However, they did not rely solely on scraping. Throughout the ancient world, humans discovered that certain plants possessed a magical, foaming property when crushed and agitated in water. These are known as soapy plants, and their secret lies in a class of naturally occurring chemical compounds called saponins. Saponins are organic molecules that are both water-soluble and fat-soluble. One end of the saponin molecule attaches to water, while the other end binds to grease and dirt, allowing the oily grime on the skin to be suspended in water and easily rinsed away. From the soapwort plant in Europe to the soapberry tree in the Americas, and the soap nut in Asia, almost every continent had its own natural detergent. Prehistoric humans would harvest these roots, leaves, or berries, crush them into a lathering paste, and use them to wash their bodies, their hair, and their animal hide clothing. They even discovered that wood ash from their campfires which contains highly alkaline potassium carbonate, could be mixed with water to create a crude, grease-cutting lye solution which, when combined with animal fats from their meals, would accidentally create the very first precursors to true soap. Yet, for the early humans of the Stone Age, bathing was never just a solitary chore performed in isolation. It was a deeply social communal, an evolutionary act. If you look at our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees and bonobos, they spend hours every day in a practice known as social grooming. They sit together, carefully picking through each other's fur to remove dirt, lice, ticks, and dead skin. This is not merely about hygiene, it is the fundamental social glue of the primate world. Social grooming triggers the release of oxytocin and endorphins, reducing heart rates, lowering stress levels, and building deep trust and alliances within the group. When early humans began to lose their thick body hair, they did not lose this social instinct. Instead of picking through fur, they began to wash and groom each other, sitting by a riverbank, scraping sand off a companion's back, combing through hair with bone needles, and applying fragrant plant oils was how early human tribes bonded. Cleanliness was a shared responsibility, a physical manifestation of care, trust, and community. As the nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle gave way to the birth of agriculture and the rise of the world's first great urban civilization, the scale of human bathing underwent a massive, revolutionary transformation. No longer confined to riverbanks and natural springs, humans began to bend water to their will, constructing monumental engineering marvels dedicated entirely to the act of getting clean. The earliest and perhaps most astonishing example of this can be found in the ruins of the Indus Valley Civilization in modern-day Pakistan. Around 2600 BC, the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro was built with a level of urban planning and sanitation that would not be matched in Europe for another 4,000 years. At the very center of Mohenjo-Daro's elevated citadel, the city's builders did not erect a massive temple to a god or a grand palace for a king. Instead, they built the Great Bath. This was a colossal public water tank, measuring approximately 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and over 2 meters deep. What makes the Great Bath an engineering masterpiece is the sophisticated material science used to construct it. The ancient builders laid finely fitted, baked bricks on their edges, sealing them with a gypsum-based mortar, to ensure that not a single drop of water could seep through the walls or leak into the surrounding soil. They applied a thick, continuous layer of bitumen, a natural tar, along the sides and floor of the tank. This is one of the earliest known examples of large-scale waterproofing in human history. Two broad, symmetrical staircases led down into the water from the north and south, ending at a small ledge where bathers could stand and wade. Water was supplied to the bath from a large, brick-lined well in an adjacent room, and a highly advanced corbelled arch drain allowed the dirty water to be systematically emptied and replaced. But why did the people of Mohenjo-Daro invest so much wealth, labor, and engineering genius into a giant pool of water? Archaeologists believe the Great Bath was not used for daily hygiene or washing off common street grime. Instead, it was a sacred, ritualistic space. In the Indus Valley Civilization, physical cleanliness was inextricably linked to spiritual purity. Before entering sacred areas or participating in civic gatherings, citizens would descend into the cool, waterproof depths of the Great Bath to wash away their spiritual impurities. It was a communal ritual of purification, a physical reset button for the soul, demonstrating that for these ancient urbanites, the boundary between the physical body and the spiritual self was completely non-existent. Further west, along the banks of the Nile, the ancient Egyptians took the obsession with cleanliness to an even greater, almost hyper-hygienic extreme. In the hot, dry, and dust-choked climate of Egypt, dirt was not just a nuisance, it was a sign of low social class and spiritual corruption. The Egyptians believed that to be dirty was to be uncivilized, resembling the chaotic, untamed forces of nature. The elite of Egyptian society engaged in what modern historians call hyperhygiene, a daily ritual of washing and grooming that bordered on the obsessive. High priests were religiously required to bathe in sacred pools 4 times a day, twice during the day and twice at night, and to shave their entire bodies from head to toe to prevent the infestation of lice and to maintain a state of absolute purity before the gods. For the wealthy Egyptian aristocracy, bathing was a highly structured, luxurious affair. While they did not have running water in the modern sense, their villas were equipped with dedicated bathrooms featuring beautifully plastered walls and stone slabs. A wealthy Egyptian would stand on this stone slab while servants poured jugs of cool Nile water over their head and shoulders, creating a primitive but highly effective shower. The wastewater would then flow through a system of stone gutters and drain away into the garden or the street. But what did they use to scrub their bodies in the absence of soap? The answer is both brilliant and deeply unsettling to modern sensibilities. They used natron. Natron is a naturally occurring mineral salt, a hydrated sodium carbonate compound harvested from the dried-up salt lake beds of the Natron Valley. If the word natron sounds familiar, it is because this is the exact same chemical drying agent that Egyptian embalmers used to dehydrate, disinfect, and preserve the dead bodies of pharaohs during the mummification process. The very substance used to make mummies was also the cornerstone of daily Egyptian hygiene. The Egyptians would mix natron with water to create a highly alkaline, purifying paste. When rubbed onto the skin, natron acted as a powerful disinfectant, killing odor-causing bacteria, absorbing excess moisture, and chemically breaking down the greasy dirt on the skin. It was an incredibly harsh, drying substance. But the Egyptians solved this by immediately following their natron wash with an application of rich animal fats, goose grease, or vegetable oils, such as castor oil and olive oil, heavily infused with fragrant essential oils of myrrh, frankincense, and lotus. This oil treatment acted as a barrier cream, sealing in moisture and protecting their skin from the blistering desert sun and dry winds. They even used natron as a daily tooth powder and breath freshener, rubbing it on their gums to keep their mouths clean. In Egypt, your smell and your skin texture were your business card. If you smelled of rancid sweat, you were cast out of polite society. But if you smelled of sweet oils and natron, you were deemed a person of high status, beauty, and divine favor. As the centuries rolled on, this Mediterranean obsession with oil, sweat, and water culminated in the grandest, most complex, and bizarre bathing culture the world has ever seen, the Roman Empire. To the Roman, bathing was not just a daily chore or a religious ritual, it was the very definition of civilization itself. The Romans believed that their massive public bathhouses, the thermae, were what separated them from the wild, unwashed barbarians who lived beyond their borders. A Roman citizen might live in a cramped, dark, and smoky apartment without any running water. But for a nominal fee, often less than the price of a loaf of bread, they could walk into a palace of marble and gold, heated by subterranean furnaces, and spend the entire afternoon getting clean, socializing, and conducting business. Entering a Roman bathhouse was a highly choreographed, multi-stage sensory experience. You would begin in the apoditerium, the changing room, where you would strip naked and hand your clothes to a slave. From there, you would enter the palestra, an open-air gymnasium to exercise, lift weights, wrestle, or play ball games. The goal of this exercise was not just fitness, but to work up a massive, dripping sweat. But here is the great historical twist. The Romans did not use soap to wash away this sweat. Although they were aware of a crude form of soap made from animal fat and ashes, which they imported from Gaul, they viewed it as a harsh, low-class hair dye rather than a personal cleanser. Instead, the Romans cleaned themselves with olive oil. Before exercising, you would have your body slathered in cheap olive oil. As you ran, wrestled, and sweated in the dusty palestra, the olive oil would mix with your sweat, the kicked-up dust of the arena, and your dead skin cells, forming a thick gray and greasy paste over your entire body. To remove this dirty, oily sludge, the Romans relied on a specialized tool called a strigil. A strigil was a curved, crescent-shaped blade made of bronze iron or, for the incredibly wealthy, solid silver. You, or more likely a personal slave, would take this curved metal blade and press it firmly against your skin. scraping it downward in long, deliberate strokes. The concave shape of the strigil acted like a squeegee, channeling the thick, dirty slurry of sweat olive oil, and exfoliated skin off your body and flinging it onto the floor. Once this scraping process was complete, you would go through a series of heated rooms of varying temperatures to finish the process. You would sweat further in the tepidarium, a warm room, then bake in the caldarium, a hot, humid steam room heated by a hypocaust system of hot air flowing beneath the floorboards, and finally plunge into the frigidarium, a cold pool, to close your pores and refresh your senses. While this scraping process sounds incredibly rough and unhygienic to our modern ears, it was actually highly effective. The olive oil dissolved the dirty sebum on the skin. The strigil physically removed the dirt and dead cells without stripping the skin's deeper moisture. And the hot to cold water therapy stimulated the cardiovascular system. But the story of the Roman strigil does not end with a clean body. In fact, it leads to one of the most bizarre, lucrative, and stomach-churning commercial markets in ancient history. What happened to the gray, oily sludge that was scraped off the bodies of bathers? In a busy Roman gymnasium, hundreds of men were scraping this slurry off their skin every single day, and the shrewd managers of these establishments realized they were sitting on a gold mine. This scraped-off mixture of sweat olive oil and dead skin was known as strigimentum in Latin, or gloios in Greek. And if that sweat and skin happened to come from a famous, highly celebrated athlete or a victorious gladiator, its value skyrocketed. The Romans and Greeks revered their top athletes and gladiators as semi-divine heroes, possessing peak physical vitality, strength, and courage. They believed that these physical virtues were not just abstract concepts, but tangible qualities that could be physically transferred through their bodily fluids. Therefore, the gloios scraped from the bodies of famous gladiators after a fight, or from Olympic-level athletes after a workout, was carefully collected by gymnasium slaves, poured into small glass vials, and sold as a highly prized, expensive commodity. Who was buying this bottle of gladiator sweat and skin grime? Wealthy Roman women were the primary consumers. They would purchase these vials of gloios and use them as high-end facial creams and beauty cosmetics, slathering the smelly, greasy residue of another human's intense physical exertion onto their own faces in the hope of capturing the youthful vitality, glowing skin, and sexual magnetism of the arena's heroes. But the market for gloios went far beyond cosmetics. It was also a cornerstone of ancient medicine. The famous Greek physician Galen, along with the Roman natural philosopher Pliny the Elder, wrote extensively about the therapeutic, healing properties of strigimentum. They believed that because this sludge was a highly concentrated mixture of human sweat oil and the natural oils of the skin, it possessed unique anti-inflammatory properties. Ancient medical texts contain detailed recipes prescribing gloios as a topical ointment to treat joint swelling, muscle sprain, inflammation, and even hemorrhoids. Shrewd business people would even scrape the grease off the walls and statues of the gymnasiums, where athletes had leaned and left sweat residue, mixing it with dirt from the floor to create a dark, sticky plaster believed to draw out infections and heal skin ulcers. To the ancient, this was not disgusting. It was a highly logical application of their understanding of the body. They did not have our modern concept of germs, but they recognized that the skin produced a powerful, protective barrier, and they were willing to pay a premium to harness the biological power of another human's sweat. But as the grand stone arches of the Roman Empire crumbled under the weight of economic collapse and barbarian invasions, this magnificent, oil-drenched bathing culture vanished almost overnight. The massive aqueducts that fed the Roman baths were severed, the hypocaust furnaces grew cold, and the grand marble halls were reclaimed by dust and weeds. This dramatic collapse gave birth to one of the most persistent and deeply ingrained historical myths of the Western world, the belief that the Middle Ages were a 1,000-year dark age of absolute filth, where people never washed, stank of rotting sewage, and believed that water was an instrument of the devil. This caricature is not only historically inaccurate, it completely ignores the daily reality of medieval life. While it is true that the sprawling, multi-acre municipal bath complexes of the Romans disappeared, the desire to be clean did not. Medieval Europeans actually valued cleanliness, but they had to adapt their methods to a world without pressurized aqueducts and massive slave-run heating systems. Because people ate with their fingers from communal platters, entering a dining hall with dirty hands was considered a grave insult to the host and a sign of animalistic breeding. To facilitate this, wealthy medieval households used aquamanals, exquisitely crafted, animal-shaped bronze or ceramic water jugs to pour scented water over the hands of their guests before and after meals. Furthermore, public bathhouses, often called stews, were surprisingly common and wildly popular in medieval towns and cities. In 13th century Paris, public bathhouse keepers had their own official guild, and professional criers would walk the narrow cobblestone streets every morning, shouting to the residents that the baths were hot and ready. In London, the stews of Southwark along the River Thames were bustling social hubs where people from all walks of life would gather. These were not sterile, silent spaces. They were lively, recreational, and often highly indulgent environments. Bathers would sit together in large, circular wooden tubs filled with warm, herb-scented water, drinking ale, gossiping, playing music, and eating lavish meals served on floating wooden trays. Of course, because these wooden tubs were communal and men and women often bathed together, many medieval bathhouses eventually developed a reputation for seediness, occasionally doubling as brothels. Yet, the primary purpose remained the same: to escape the cold, damp climate of northern Europe and luxuriate in the warmth of hot water. For centuries, the medieval world maintained a healthy, active relationship with water. Then, in the mid-14th century, everything changed. A silent, invisible killer swept across the trade routes from Asia, decimating the populations of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The Black Death, a catastrophic outbreak of bubonic plague, wiped out up to 60% of the European population in a matter of years. It was an apocalypse of unimaginable proportions, and in their desperation to understand and halt the slaughter, the finest scientific and medical minds of the era turned their attention to the human body. Renaissance physicians, searching for a physical explanation of how this deadly air entered the body, looked closely at the skin. They observed that when a person sat in a hot bath, their skin became red, soft, and moist, and their pores dilated and opened. From this observation, they drew a logical but disastrous conclusion: hot water opened the pores of the skin, stripping away the body's natural protective oils and leaving the internal organs completely vulnerable to the toxic miasma floating in the air. To take a hot bath, they argued, was to open the floodgates of your body to the plague. This medical panic was further compounded in the late 15th century by the rapid, terrifying spread of syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that tore through Europe and was frequently contracted in the warm, humid, and highly intimate environments of communal public bathhouses. Virtually overnight, the public bathhouses were boarded up, and water went from being a source of health and pleasure to a perceived death sentence. For the next 3 centuries, from the height of the Renaissance through the Enlightenment, Western Europe entered an era of profound water phobia. The wealthy and powerful stopped bathing in water almost entirely. It is recorded that King Louis XIV of France, the magnificent Sun King who built the Palace of Versailles, only took 2 full baths in his entire adult life, both of which reportedly made him so ill and physically distressed that he vowed never to do so again. But this does not mean the elites of Europe walked around covered in thick crusts of dirt and smelling like open sewers. Instead, they pioneered a completely dry method of hygiene, shifting the burden of cleanliness from their skin to their clothing. The cornerstone of this dry washing era was white linen. Linen, woven from the fibers of the flax plant, possesses a unique capillary action that makes it incredibly absorbent. It acts like a natural sponge, drawing sweat, sebum, and environmental oils away from the skin and trapping them within the fabric. The Renaissance and Baroque elites believed that linen was a self-cleaning mechanism. By wearing a crisp, white linen shirt against the skin, the fabric would naturally draw out all the impurities and toxins from the body. Therefore, instead of washing their bodies, the wealthy simply changed their linen shirts multiple times a day. If you were a person of high status, You would rub your skin vigorously with dry, coarse towels to scrape away the sweat. Apply heavy doses of alcohol-based perfumes, powders, and pomades to mask any natural bodily odors, and then put on a fresh, snow-white linen shirt. The cleanliness of a gentleman or a lady was judged not by the scent of their skin, but by the pristine whiteness of their linen collar and cuffs. If your linen was clean, you were considered clean, even if the skin beneath it had not touched water in years. This bizarre, waterless equilibrium lasted until the 19th century, when a series of devastating cholera epidemics and the groundbreaking discoveries of modern science shattered the miasma theory forever. Doctors like John Snow in London proved that cholera was transmitted through contaminated drinking water, and pioneering scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch established the germ theory of disease. Suddenly, the medical community realized that dirt was not just an aesthetic issue, and that the skin was not a porous sponge waiting to absorb poisonous air. Instead, dirt was a breeding ground for invisible, microscopic pathogens that could be physically washed away with water and soap. With this realization, the industrial machinery of the Victorian era went into overdrive. Soap, which for thousands of years had been a crude, heavily taxed luxury item used primarily for washing wool and industrial textiles, was suddenly mass-produced on an unprecedented scale. Chemical factories developed new industrial processes to manufacture cheap, gentle sodium carbonate and vegetable oil soaps, turning what was once a harsh industrial degreaser into a mild, fragrant bar of personal care. But the transition to our modern, daily bathing routine was not driven by science alone. It was accelerated by one of the most powerful forces of the modern world, corporate advertising. In the early 20th century, soap and chemical companies realized that to sell their newly mass-produced goods, they needed to create a psychological demand. They needed to make people feel dirty, insecure, and socially anxious about their natural human biology. In 1919, a deodorant company launched an advertising campaign for a product called Odorono. The advertisement, titled "Within the Curve of a Woman's Arm," was a psychological masterpiece. It did not focus on the health benefits of staying clean. Instead, it targeted social shame. It warned women that they could be emitting an offensive, silent odor of sweat which they named body odor, or BO, without even realizing it, destroying their chances of finding romance, keeping a husband, or maintaining social respect. The campaign was wildly successful, and the term BO entered the global lexicon, transforming a natural, healthy biological process into a shameful social taboo. Similar campaigns soon followed, inventing or popularizing medical-sounding terms like halitosis for bad breath to sell mouthwash, and dandruff to sell medicated shampoos. Within a few decades, corporate marketing had successfully rewritten the rules of human hygiene. We were no longer washing to stay healthy or to bond with our community. We were washing because we were terrified of smelling like human beings. This brings us to the profound, scientific paradox of the modern bathroom. Today, the average person steps into a high-pressure shower every single morning, lathering their entire body with synthetic body washes, foaming gel, and antibacterial soaps. We scrub away every trace of oil, sweat, and natural odor, and then immediately step out and apply synthetic moisturizers, barrier creams, and artificial fragrances to replace the very things we just stripped away. From a biological standpoint, this daily, aggressive scrubbing is a disaster for our skin. The human skin is not a sterile plastic wrapper, it is a living, breathing, and highly complex ecosystem. It is home to the skin microbiome, a delicate, invisible forest of billions of beneficial bacteria, fungi, and microbes that live in perfect harmony with our body. The most common of these, such as Staphylococcus epidermidis, feed on our natural sebum and sweat, converting them into organic acids that create a slightly acidic barrier on our skin known as the acid mantle. This acid mantle is our body's first line of defense against the outside world. It naturally repels harmful, pathogenic bacteria, prevents skin infections, and regulates moisture levels. When we lather ourselves in harsh, alkaline detergents and hot water, We do not just wash away the dirt, we clear-cut the entire forest of our microbiome. We strip away the sebum, destroy the acid mantle, and leave our skin dry, cracked, and highly vulnerable to eczema, acne, and infections. Furthermore, the very odor we are trying to escape is often exacerbated by this cycle. Fresh human sweat is actually completely odorless. It is mostly water and salt. The characteristic smell of sweat only occurs when the bacteria living in our apocrine glands break down the proteins and lipids in our sweat. When we constantly sanitize our skin with antibacterial soaps, we create an ecological vacuum. The friendly, odor-neutralizing bacteria are wiped out, allowing more aggressive, foul-smelling, and resilient bacteria to colonize the empty space, making us smell worse when we inevitably skip a shower. When we look back across the vast, sweeping timeline of human history, we can see that our ancestors possessed a wisdom that we have largely forgotten. From the Paleolithic hunters who used wild, saponin-rich plants and river sand to gently exfoliate their skin, to the ancient Romans who used olive oil and a curved bronze strigil to lift away dirt without stripping their natural moisture, the ancients understood that hygiene was a balance. They did not seek to sterilize their bodies, they sought to manage their biology. Their methods of cleaning were designed to protect the skin's natural barrier, not destroy it. But perhaps the greatest loss in our transition to modern hygiene is not biological but social. For thousands of generations, bathing was a communal, shared, and deeply human experience. It was the social grooming of the Stone Age, the sacred, shared purification of the great bath of Mohenjo-Daro, the bustling, gossipy warmth of the Roman thermae, and the lively, musical wooden tubs of the medieval stews. Getting clean was an opportunity to connect, to talk, to relax, and to care for one another. It was a physical manifestation of community. Today, we have turned this beautiful, social ritual into a lonely utilitarian, an isolated chore. We lock ourselves behind frosted glass doors in sterile tiled rooms, rushing through a solitary routine designed to make us presentable for a workplace, driven by a manufactured fear of our own natural scent. We have traded the warmth of human connection and the biological wisdom of our ancestors for the cold, sterile perfection of a plastic bottle. The next time you step into your high-pressure, hot shower and reach for that bottle of chemically engineered body wash, take a moment to look at your skin. Remember that you are not a sterile walking doll designed to smell like synthetic vanilla or artificial pine. You are a sweaty, social primate, carrying an ancient, living ecosystem on your body. Your relationship with dirt, water, and oil is not a modern problem to be solved with chemicals, but a beautiful, complex, and fundamental part of your evolutionary story. Perhaps, in our endless quest to scrub away every trace of our humanity, it is time to look back at the wisdom of the ancients and realize that sometimes, getting clean is about embracing the very things that make us human.